I am chess grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk.
Hello, I am Grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk. I'd like to comment for you one of my rapid games against Grandmaster Tregubov, which we played in the Chess Classic Festival in Mainz, Germany. Tregubov started the game with d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, c4, b6, which is a Queen's Indian defense. Here he opted for g3. I played bishop b7, bishop a6 is another possibility here, bishop g2, bishop e7, castle, castle, and after thinking for a while, Tregubov played the move rook e1, which actually the day before was seen in the two rapid games between first one between Morozevich and Judith Polgar, and the second one between Morozevich against Magnus Carlsen. I continued the same way as Magnus Carlsen did against Morozevich. I played knight a6. So both games, my game and the game Morozevich-Carlsen, continued knight e5, d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3, c5, and here Tregubov and Morozevich both played bishop g5, d takes c5 is another option, with the idea after knight takes c5 to play bishop e3. After bishop g5, I thought for a while. I remembered that the game Morozevich-Carlsen took place the evening before, and of course I recalled that the same variation took place, but I didn't really think that we are following this game, and I found out about it only when our game was finished. So finally, after some thought, I played h6. I was also trying to think about knight e4 possibility. After h6, Tregubov took on f6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, e3, bishop takes e5, d takes e5, knight c7, and here Tregubov played queen h5. He wasn't happy about this move, and actually the game Morozevich-Carlsen continued by queen a4, and after queen e7, f4, rook f to d8, the position was very interesting and unclear, and the game after some play continued in draw. After queen h5, the queen is not ideally placed here, since it's difficult to imagine that white will actually be able to create some attack on the king's side, so I agree that the queen is better placed here on the queen side. But after queen h5, the game continued. I played queen e7, rook a to d1, rook a to d8, and here after f4, I continued the game with the very nice d4 move, because the only problem in the positions that I have right now is the weakness of the d5 pawn. So the white's idea is to play rook d2 and rook d1 and to try to win this pawn. And so when I saw that I can get rid of this weakness, of course I opted for this way. Tregubov continued with e takes d4. If he plays bishop b7, I play d takes c3, and after b takes c3 I play knight b5, and then I take the pawn on c3, and here we can see that the queen on h5 is actually too far away from the game, and his pawn, for example, on a2 is hanging, and the pawn on c3 is hanging as well. And of course, if I would take on c3, my pawns c5 and b6 would be too strong. So that's why he played e takes d4, but hereafter bishop takes g2, king takes g2, c takes d4, knight e4. I have another very nice move, which is knight d5. I'm using the fact that he cannot take on d4 with the rook, because after rook takes d4 I can play knight takes f4 check, and then will win the rook on d4. And of course my knight is going to the e3 square, where he will be ideally placed. Since I'm also threatening to play knight e3 check and to win the rook on d1, my opponent played a king g1. Of course I continued knight e3 anyway, and after rook d3, I played f6, which is pretty obvious because he has a very strong place for his knight on d6, and that's why I'm trying to destroy his pawn structure, his strong pawn on e5, to distract it by playing f6. Of course, my opponent played knight d6 anyway. I took on e5, f takes e5, f takes e5, queen e6, threatening to play both queen takes a2 and in some way queen d5. He played b3, and here I made another nice waiting move, which is rook d7, because it's obvious that if we imagine one of my rooks on this second rank, it will be almost mortal for my opponent, since then the second rook will go to the second rank and his king will be in a serious trouble. So that's why I played rook d7. I wanted to play rook c7 and rook c2 in the future. Here my opponent had some time trouble, since we are playing only a 20-minute game with 5 seconds increment for each move, but it's really difficult to play with such time control under this kind of positional pressure, because my knight on e3 is very strong. I'm always thinking of playing queen d5 with the checkmate threats, and again I have this rook c7, rook c2 and then rook f2 idea. So that's why my opponent tried to decide all his problems in a tactical way, and he sacrificed a pawn by playing knight c4, and also he exchanged a strong knight on e3. I took on c4, he took on c4, and I played queen takes c4. My opponent continued the game with queen e2. I played rook d to f7, threatening to play rook f2. That's why he played e6, rook e7, queen e4, rook d8, protecting the pawn on d4, rook f3, rook d to e8. We see that although white has only one weakness, pawn weakness on e6, his king is too weak. His rook on e1 is not protected, and so it's really difficult for him to play, especially under some time pressure that he had. And here he played a very interesting move, rook f6. That's good that I had enough time to think about it, because for the moment I thought that I'm not able to take on f6 because of the perpetual that he would have, queen g6 and then queen h6, queen f6 checks. But I didn't see how can I improve this position, and since I believe that my position is much better, at the end I forced myself to think more deeply and to calculate this variation. And so finally I saw that after g takes f6, the move that I played, queen g6 check, king h8, queen takes h6, rook h7, queen takes f6 check, rook g7, his checks are coming to the end, because if he continues checking queen h6, I would just play king g8 and I'm a rook up. He didn't continue checking my king, he played rook e5, but in that case I'm still a rook up and it's my move. So I played queen c1, king g2, queen d2 check, king h3, king g8, e7, rook h7 check, king g4, queen d1 check, king g5, a very long journey of the white king, but unfortunately his position is hopeless. I could have finished the game by playing rook h5, but I chose another way, which is also very nice. I played rook g7 check, king h6,